Let us bow our heads. Father, we give you thanks and praise, Lord, that we can be here to be gathered together again for another Wednesday night session. Tonight's session, Lord, is one of a sensitive topic where we are looking at child abuse, we're looking at signs, we're looking at responses, we're looking at consequences. Father, I pray that whatever is said tonight, that it will be that we is something that that we can use it to help others and to recognize the signs where it is that we may see where children are being abused, and not only just recognize the signs but that we will have the knowledge so that we be able to help others and to do something about it so that we can stamp it out. So bless those who are on the panel. I pray you give them clarity as you as they share the wisdom and the knowledge that they have gained over the years in this area. And may we have a blessed night. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Again, I welcome you all to this evening's program, and I want to welcome in a special way Sister Debbie Henry. She is the Director for Women, Children, and Adolescents at the union level. Sister Henry, welcome. Thank you so much for joining with us. This evening, we have as our panelists Pastor Ricardo Selman, very familiar to most, if not all of us. He is the Director for Family Ministries, and he is also a psychotherapist, very knowledgeable and experienced in the area of counseling and ministry and pastoring. And he is always willing to share his knowledge and to minister to us. Pastor Selman, welcome and thank you once more. We also have Delvina Wade, Sister Delvina Wade. She is a senior child care officer at the Child Care Board. She is the Children's Ministries leader of the Advent Avenue Church and assistant personal ministries leader. She has enjoyed decades of working with families and especially children and youth. She's a wife and a mother of 2 children. She is passionate about children's ministries and working for God. Sister Jordan.
And it is my pleasure to introduce Sergeant Acting Kim Harris, who is an officer in the police force and has been for many, many years. She is attached to the Juvenile Liaison Scheme Department, and she has also been working there for many years. A trained social worker, she has influenced the lives of many a child and helped them to move on to a more productive way of life. She is the mother of 2 very handsome and very good young men. And I am very pleased that she took time out to be with us this evening. She loves children passionately. And I know that for a fact that I came to know her through my daughter, who spent some time in the for field experience in the juvenile liaison department. And that is how I met Mrs. Harris. I was very impressed with her treatment of my daughter and some other children who've passed through her hands. And so, without further ado, I want you to welcome all of our participants this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Jordan. Now, before we go into our discussion, I would invite that if you have questions or if you have comments, you may place them in our chat so that we can recognize them and share them with the presenters at the appropriate time. We are going to invite each of our presenters, beginning with Sister Waite and then Sister Harris and then Pastor Selman, to present briefly to us. And then the floor would be open for your questions. Again, we're going to begin with Sister Waite and then Sister Harris and Pastor Selman. Sister Waite.
Good night, everyone, and thank you, Sister Hoyt, for inviting me to this forum. It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, both as a child care officer, a mother, children's ministries leader. The safety and well-being of children is always at the forefront of what I do and my approach to working with young people, children for that matter. What I want to do in the 5 minutes that have been allotted, just to give a little background on child sexual abuse, and then I will briefly look at some of the physical and behavioral signs of the various categories of child abuse, and then I will, take questions for further elaboration. Now, we know that child abuse is a prevalent and enmeshed phenomenon in our society, and wishing it to go away will not happen. It is also futile repetitiveness to continue to ask questions such as, how can we stop child abuse? And why are child protection workers not proactive in their efforts to stop child abuse? Well, there are two simple answers to these questions. First of all, child abuse is impossible to predict, and there is no racial, economic, religious, parochial, or social profiling of a child abuser, meaning that anybody can be a child abuser. Child abuse can happen to any of our children and at any time, and unless it occurs in the public view, it is usually an event that occurs within a private domain. Secondly, no amount of programs or public education can eliminate the stress of everyday life in families and in the society as a whole, and the depravity of sex offenders, both of which are just a few reasons why children are abused. So on that background, with that background, I just want to look briefly, I'll go through it, not quickly, but just for you to get an idea of our categories of child abuse. I'm at the Child Care Board in keeping with UNICEF. We have 5 categories of child abuse, and that's physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and there's also abandonment. All right, and for each category of abuse, there are usually both physical and behavioral signs that may indicate that this child is being abused. So I'll start with physical abuse. I will do that, and then I'll just go quickly. All right. So for physical abuse, we can, if we notice bruises that are, excuse me one. If you notice bruises that are unexplained in various stages of healing, or distinctive shapes, like in the shape of a belt buckle. You notice the caretaker attempts to hide the injuries that is child might have on a dress, long sleeves, that sort of stuff, long pants, or just like, when it's like inappropriate to have on that type of clothing. Description of how the injury was obtained does not really make sense. History of frequent or recurring injuries, that's usually a cue. Overly fearful of parents being contacted at wrongdoing. And a child might do something wrong at school and is petrified of parents being called. Withdrawing from physical contact, aggression towards others, usually smaller children who sometimes are physically abused are very aggressive towards younger children, sometimes. And then we have neglect. So under neglect, we can look at repeated absences from school, neglected appearance, poor hygiene, inappropriate clothing, child not receiving necessary medical care, child falling asleep in class, fatigue, constant hunger, malnutrition, delinquency, antisocial behavior, disruptive behavior, lack of supervision, abandonment. So that is also included in neglect. Child left under the supervision of someone who's unable to adequately care for this child. Like for instance, when children are left with, elderly parents or great grandparents or who themselves have challenges and cannot care for these children. Under sexual abuse, we can look at signs and or symptoms of maybe of a pregnancy. I mean, that one is obvious. Sexually transmitted diseases, itching, bleeding, or injury to the private parts, unusual sexual knowledge that is obtained, and inappropriate, sorry, not that it's detailed, and inappropriate for the age of the child, sleep disturbances, nightmares, bedwetting, fear of going to bed, changes in eating, isolation, withdrawing from other social friends and so on, unwilling to undress in front of others, and they echo unusual sexual behaviors. And finally, for emotional abuse, and emotional abuse, by the way, also is also one of the byproducts, as if you want, of all the other forms of abuse. And this would be, and this under this we can look at child deprived of affection and approval, child isolated from social contact or play, anxiousness, low self-esteem, poor social and communication skills, suicide attempts, physical and emotional, mental and developmental delays, overreaction to mistakes. Now, these are just a few things that I've mentioned here, especially under the category of emotional abuse, and in our Caribbean context, and how we relate to our children, how we speak, how we parent. This is an area for really for further discussion. And let me just give you a few general signs that could cover each category. Disclosure of any type of abuse that is either by the child or by someone else, inconsistent, conflicting or vague stories, child fears a particular adult, child is afraid to be alone with someone, behavioral extremes like being disruptive, withdrawn, aggressive, etc., sudden marked changes in behavior, families that are highly isolated, regression to earlier forms of developmental stages, and low self-esteem, low self-image, compulsive, attention-seeking behavior. That's it in brief. We're going to, of course, we're going to expand on this a little later as we go on, but that is my brief opening at this time.
Thank you so much, Sister Harris.
Blessed good night to all. Miss Wave probably would have given a synopsis of most of what I would say, or perhaps cross daily. But we're going to try to approach domestic violence from a legal standpoint. Domestic violence is considered to be taboo, a subject that is really discussed, especially in young children who are being exposed to domestic violence. These children believe that they're not permitted to speak about these incidents of abuse. This behavior is not unusual, as their home environment is a very intimate part of their life. As we know, child abuse exists and it's very real. You would be amazed to see how a child can hold a secret. They are very good at it. And it's very difficult sometimes to actually identify the true problem. You see the presenting problem, and it is so difficult sometimes to withdraw this information so that you can get to the root issue. But my discourse will approach child abuse from a legal and social perspective. The law is there to investigate each report and suspected incident of domestic violence, whereas the social response will focus on the preventative and rehabilitative tools, which would include soft skills, emotional intelligence, effective communication, and active listening. Sometimes we believe that we're listening, and we're not. Maybe we are on our cell phones or we're distracted. And sometimes children can come and enlighten you or say to you little things to let you know what, you're not listening. And there's this soft skills, effective communication. A child may very well say, why are you speaking to me like that? Are you angry? And these are things that we really have to listen to, because I'm all for prevention. I'm really hoping that we can work together to prevent. The treatment is fine, but if we can prevent it, our children will be happy. They will actually be achieving their fullest potential if they're happy, if their recreation skills are there, if they can feel included in their sphere, whether at home or at school. Recently, I attended my son's graduation, and the national anthem was being sung by a young lady, and it spoke of our legacy, the legacy that we receive throughout our heritage. But in order to safeguard the rite of passage, we must reserve our future through child protection. And lawmakers recognize that the act needed some amendment to speak clearly and to define the various types of abuse. And in 2016, the act was amended. Domestic violence speaks to the willful infliction or threat of infliction or harm by one person in a domestic relation upon another person in the relationship, and it includes child abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. But we need to understand who is the child in this relationship. And the act further defines a child as a person under the age of 18 years who is not married and considered to be in a domestic relationship by virtue of continued residence or a relationship of consanguinity, which means blood relations, or affinity, affection, or love with a perpetrator or victim of domestic violence. And it includes an adopted child, a stepchild, and a ward. So the biological child is already inclusive. Child abuse. Child abuse is defined within the act as an act of domestic violence perpetrated against a child. And it includes causing and permitting a child to witness, to hear, or to be exposed to acts of domestic violence. The types of abuse, you would have heard the majority of them from Sister Wave. They include the verbal, the psychological, the physical, emotional, and psychological. And within the emotional and psychological, those are the difficult ones to identify. How do we identify when our children are in pain? How do we understand when they're not coping? For example, some indicators I believe that Sister Wave may not have fully touched on. I don't intend to be repeating. Low self-esteem, they become withdrawn, socially awkward, unexplained change in behavior. The grades may be poor. A child can move from passive to extremely aggressive, or from from mild to aggressive. They can become bullies, or they can allow themselves to be targeted. Being depressed, possible suicide, and unexplained injuries. The thing about domestic violence / child abuse, I remember years ago, persons spoke about men coming home on a Friday. He was paid, he may stop at the rum shop and he may drink, and somehow he would beat his wife. And children were present. So with the act making specific reference to child abuse, I embrace the fact that a child, it is included of causing and permitting a child to witness, to hear, to expose any act of domestic violence. And it gives the police, the act gives the police powers in which we can act on the victim's behalf. At this point, I am going to hand over so that further discussion can be had. And I'm looking forward to a healthy discussion on child abuse. Thank you.
Pastor Salmon, thank you so much, Sister Harris. Pastor Salmon.
Let me say a good night to everyone. I'm going to look at this through the eyes of a counselor. or eyes of a mental health professional, to some who may prefer that term, or through the eyes of a psychotherapist. Let me say that it is it's common for counselors to encounter clients with either a childhood history of abuse or neglect, or a suspicion or actual evidence of current abuse. Root of many presenting problems can be traced back to childhood histories of emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, or neglect, and the subsequent development of maladaptive traits and behavior. Now, these faulty or injurious childhood relationships with primary caregivers exist on a continuum of a low or high adverse impact. Childhood maltreatment affects personality development. It affects interpersonal relationships. It affects school. It affects job functioning and the development of chronic life adjustment problems, personality disorders, psychopathology, multiple personality disorders. In other words, to make that simple, there are those children who, because of abuse at some point during their life, could possibly develop some kind of a psychological problem, the kind of problems that would affect them as they grow up in a job, even at school. And it is for these reasons that counselors and mental health professionals take rather seriously the issue of child abuse. The effects are very traumatic and the effects are long lasting. Mental health professionals may be involved in primary or secondary prevention, depending on their interests and expertise. There are some counselors who would want to treat based on how they have been trained. Some would prefer to deal with children before the problem begins. Some after the problem is there. So when we speak about the primary prevention, this is directed towards preventing a problem from ever happening. When we speak in terms of a secondary prevention, this is targeted at a specific high-risk population or group of children. And these examples would include home visitor programs for mothers of newborn identified at the hospital as being at risk. There are some homes after a child is born, the hospital personnel, doctors, etc., know that this child is going to be in a high-risk environment, and hence they would probably suggest that some kind of intervention be necessary to guide this family through. Now, there's also the tertiary intervention. The primary focus of counselors or mental health professionals is tertiary through provisions of therapeutic services to clients with psychological problems that have impaired their day-to-day functioning, so that the council would intervene to help those clients in how to function on a day-to-day basis. Now, in the field of child abuse and neglect, this involves working with both child victims and parents who abuse or neglect their children. Now, the therapeutic interventions with children are directed towards preventing the harmful effects of maltreatment. Therapeutic interventions with abusive parents are directed towards preventing recidivism, through education, developing problem solving skills, and providing cognitive or behavioral therapy. Now, before I finish up here, just giving you a quick overview. The counselor, in cases of child abuse and neglect, will evaluate the child, and they will also evaluate the parents or the parent and help to develop a treatment plan that is beneficial to both the child and the parent. Now, professionals with expertise in working with adults typically limit their practice to adults, and there are those who work with children that will typically limit their treatment to children. So it is not to say that the person who treats the adult cannot treat the children and vice versa. What we are saying is that there are professionals who would prefer to work specifically with children, and there are those who will prefer to work specifically with adults, so that the treatment begins by developing, always in any treatment, by developing a therapeutic relationship. You're evaluating the overall functioning of the client, and planning treatment goals and intervention strategies based on the initial and outgoing assessment of the client's needs, so that services to children, where we are looking at here, but you cannot treat one without looking at the other, but services for children and their families may be limited to crisis intervention and referral, brief therapy, which can take about 10 to 12 weeks, or long-term therapy. All right. I think that I will let me give you this, say this before we finish here. Now, child abuse and neglect may have been found, can be found in generations, what we may call intergenerational, can be found in families from generation to generation. Now, although not all maltreated children mature to become parents who abuse and neglect their children, in many families, however, it could happen. We can find that children who are abused can go on to abuse even their children when they come along. So these patterns and intergeneration patterns can be changed, and they can be modified through education and effective treatment interventions with children and their parents. Child maltreatment by parents and caregivers has a significant impact on every area of our society, and it can become a very, very expensive venture, which is why it's very important that the child abuse in any form needs to be, as far as possible, eradicated from society. I will finish it there, and I will take any questions as we go on. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We would begin with the question that reads, are there specific factors which put children at risk for one or more type of abuse or neglect? Are there specific factors which put children at risk for one or more type of abuse or neglect?
Can I take
Anyone
that
who
one?
would jump in?
Begin with that one.
Okay, Pastor.
Never like talking first, you know. Hello. All right, let me begin to answer the question as the others get their thoughts together. You want to know what are some of those factors that would impact that can probably cause abuse in children. There are some homes that are very, very chaotic. There are some homes that are very confused. They have very poor parenting skills. And because they have such poor parenting skills, there's no structure. There's no discipline. This kind of household can be exposed to abuse. And as a matter of fact, some of the homes that we've known to have been exposed to a lot of abuse in a lot of its forms are homes where there are a number of families living in where there are, I don't know if we still have those kind of homes, but there are some homes that have the brother, the sister, the uncle, the aunt, the niece, the nephew, the father, the mother, all of those um, um, family members living in the same environment can lend to abuse. Um, there are some homes where there's also psychosis, paranoia, and other pathologies. These kind of homes as well, you can find abuse. Not only that, a lot of homes with abuse are single parent homes. They're homes where a mother may be the only breadwinner, or she may not be working at all. And she can meet a man, a boyfriend, who will come home and he would help to look after, he promises her that he will help to look after the children. And but he does really look after the children, and that kind of, those kind of homes, if the girl, and maybe in this environment now with a boy, because you know there are men interfering with boys, and that is how a lot of boys have become homosexuals and so on and so forth, and even ladies interfering with girls, a lot of them become lesbians. So you find in that kind of environment where the mother is dependent on the money coming in from a man, that this man can also become abusive, sexually abusive to her children. And oftentimes the mother will overlook what the man is doing for the sake of the money. He wants the money, she wants the money, so she would overlook any attempt by the child to say that, you know, this man is abusing her, because what she wants is the money. A matter of fact, if there are 2 girls, 3 girls in that house, chances are a man, pedophile I would call him, will abuse those girls and get away with it, because you know they will say things like, even if you tell your mother or if you tell your father, they're not going to listen to me or whatever. Or some of them would have outside fathers. So these are some of the things that kind of expose children to sexual abuse. Of course, it's domestic violence, like Mrs. Harris mentioned earlier. That is a common thing. As long as there's domestic violence present, chances are the child can also be exposed to some form of abuse. I'll leave the rest to the others. I'm sure that Melvin is dying to say something there.
So let me just add to some of what Pastor Selburn has. Has informed us on. I just want to add to that because he's touched on many of the things I was just about to mention. One of the areas, and I'm sure that you can recognize this in our society today, is the values and norms concerning violence force. You know, in certain communities, violence is the norm. Cursing, men on the block, smoking, swearing at the children, quarreling and carrying on, and aggressiveness in the homes. Pastor Selma mentioned the homes. These homes sometimes not necessarily overcrowded, but you have like 2 or 3 generations living in that home. You get like the grandmother or the great grandmother, the grandmother, her children, and their young children, and the children of several brothers and sisters, and you get a lot of conflict within your home. You always intervening in these types of situations. You will find that children are very aggressive because they're exposed to aggression. They fight over toys, and they fight over the game to play on the computer, and so the children, and they come into the day nurseries, they come into the schools with these types of behaviors. So persons acceptance of, and that's normal to them. That's the norm, but the children are actually exposed to that. It's both emotional abuse, and many times the children are also physically and can be sexual abuse as well, because if your home is overcrowded and children are, your sleeping arrangement is not set up in a way that will keep your children safe, and as Pastor Simon said, whether they be boy or girl, that the tendency for that child to be exposed to sexual abuse, whether they are sexually abused themselves, or they will see a grown-up naked, or see their older sibling on the cell phone watching pornography or the TV or something like that, because there's no space and no privacy, that child is more likely to become exposed to some form of abuse. And then we take the whole issue of the whole socioeconomic level of most homes. It is generally felt, and it's probably so based on the research, although we cannot always say that it doesn't occur in the socioeconomic brackets more so than it might be happening, though we might not know. But because most of our intervention is generally at the lowest socioeconomic level, and we can see and we can trace based on the variables that poverty, sometimes causes people to do things that they might not do generally if they were able to afford other things, and afford to do things differently. And I want to elaborate. I take Pastor Simon put it very nicely. He spoke about mothers accepting money, for the younger girls or whatever to help with the household. And the same thing goes to sometimes when girls are sexually abused by their boyfriends, and we talk about teenage girls, 14 and 15, because we know that under the law, a girl cannot give permission for any man to have sex with her under the age of 16, right? So the law in Barbados gives you permission, that's the law of the land, permission to have sex at the age of 16. But many times, sometimes you will find parents might say, that's your boyfriend. He can support that child, or he helps do something, he would help contribute to the household or whatever, and they're not willing to, for one, take the matter before the court and go through the process, or they might be more willing to kind of like allow the boy to become a part of what's happening in this girl's life. Hopefully he will care for the baby or whatever. So again, it depends on the norms and the values that many persons are believing when it comes to abuse, especially for us here in the Caribbean. And then we also have some child abuse stressors, which could be linked to some of Pastor Selman's presentation. We know that children who are physically challenged, different, are most susceptible to abuse, right? Because they cannot protect themselves. It takes a lot of patience to deal with them. They need persons who are kind and loving and will go the distance, and those children are vulnerable. Children who are both physically, mentally different, and children who are temperamentally different as well, and behaviorally different. So if you have a child that quote unquote hard is, who's defiant, who's self-willed, and who has a mind of his or her own, that child might not let it get on lucky blow, right? Get called with more, get whatever, because that child is different. Yeah. And then even in some instances, you may get like a stepchild, a foster child, in many instances it relates to the stepchild, you will get a number of children in the home, and the one that the father is supporting is the one who gets the best treatment. So the one that the father bring the bag of snacks for, and the bag of drinks and whatever, and is supporting, that child might get the best treatment. The others might be told, hey, you father didn't bring a knife for you, and you father at jail, and this is, and then so that's emotional distress for children. I mean, they weren't asked to be born, they weren't asked to they didn't ask you to choose that man to have a child with, but you did, and but they're the ones who bear the frustration of the mother when that child is not supporting the child. And then we also have our situational stresses, like I spoke about poverty, unemployment, mobility, isolation, and poor housing. If you're unemployed and you do not have the money to stretch to make ends meet, you are likely to be more frustrated, easily ticked off, have less patience, more likely to, to tell your child something you should not say, or, administer corporal punishment when there is no need to do so, because the mother herself, or the father in that instant, is not coping with the stress of being unemployed, the stress of, not having poor housing, whatever the case might be. And then you have external relationships internal relationships like discord in the family. Take Pastor Tammy would have mentioned some of that, so I wouldn't go over it. And then you have like very dominant parents, like, what you say goes, and there's no discussion, and they're very, very authoritarian in the way that they parent and they do what they do in their households. And then you have parent-child relationships, such as attachment issues. Like the favorite child syndrome. I just coined that, the favorite child syndrome. And the one, again, who's the one the father is supporting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is the one that would probably do better in that household. So these are some of the parent-child relationship issues. Adolescents who's very, as it were, who's not listening and challenging to work with, and the parent, we get parents coming and say, like, take this child, I want you back at my house. And I'm sure Kim could attest to some of this. Or the child gets into trouble, and you call the parent, I ain't coming. So then you shall get officer, the police, whoever has to deal with the matter, because parents are frustrated. They think that they're kind of giving up on parenting and, and taking control of their children, and you can get some of that. And then we also have our parent produce stressors such as low self-esteem. We mentioned some of that, substance abuse, depression. We know that today with COVID-19 that we have seen an increase of that versus isolation, depression, being unemployed. That sort of stuff can lead to an increase in child abuse. And so these are some of the other areas I want to look at. One other area that we sometimes neglect is the whole area of cyber bullying, right? And the use of the internet. What happens within our schools where children are bullied, sometimes by their peers, but also by other, by adults as well, things that they put, being critical and what do they do? Not liking pictures and saying all these things can cause children to become depressed, want to commit suicide, cut themselves. And so cyber abuse and bullying is another form of abuse on our children that we also need to address as well. Thank you.
Okay. You've touched on a lot of factors that influence and contribute to child abuse. And what came out in my mind would be the cultural norms. Not only is it taboo, but a lot of deviant acts seem to be the norm. And society, there are lots of persons in society who I would say refuse to challenge and appear to accept. And I think in the case of child abuse, specifically in domestic violence, a lot of persons are in denial. A lot of persons do not wish to accept that there is sexual deviance or sexual abuse or physical abuse against their children. And they look to make excuses and they try to assign blame to the child for behavior. It is very difficult. And what makes my job difficult, and this is speaking from experience, treating adults. Treating the child where you can create a plan of action, you would assess and you would put a plan of action in place. And then you realize, you know what? The environment has fostered this behavior. It is very challenging to have to approach the adult, the parent, the guardian, and say, let's try it this way. They assume that by saying that you are assigning blame. But domestic violence has become in some cases a norm. It is truly a cycle that has to be broken. It continues to interrupt our children's recreational space, their happy space, the space that they should really be able to enjoy life as a child. And when we look at learning, observational learning, a child in an abusive relationship where the child is being abused, whether directly or just by being present, this child is learning. And we're looking at the impact of the child, but what we're about the impact of these young people when they become adults, when they get into relationships. And I see my father beating my mother beating my father, because it is gender equal. There's no specific that the man has to beat, because there are some women who are really violent. Some children beat on their parents, but the child is seeing this behavior, and the child believes that they can assign this behavior in their relationship to their partner or to their children. And we are seeing a lot of cycles in our work environment. Sometimes I assign the fact not only to denial, but lack of education. I truly believe that some persons really don't understand this is domestic violence. You take a child's hand and you put it on the stove as a punishment. That was years ago, but there are still persons who are inflicting this type of abuse to a child. The type of trauma that child experience when this is done, it is difficult to correct and treat if the child does not open up. Some children will not even say unless someone sees it and question it, and that makes it difficult. Our children are learning daily, and their behaviors are impacted by all of these contributory factors. To that end, we looked at denial and lack of education. So I'm hoping from this session that even if it's not in your home, you might actually know someone who is experiencing domestic violence, and you're able to reach out to the police department, whether it be juvenile or not, or Mrs. Wave's department, or probation, or wherever the case may be. Thank you.
Thank you. You all have said, you all have opened a window, and some of the things that have come out I was not aware of. And so I'm so happy for this opportunity here for us to be educated in this regard. My next question: how does abuse in any form affect a child's development? How does it affect a child's development? And I would let any one of you jump in when you're ready.
I'll just touch on one. I'm sure the others will have other aspects that they can touch on. It does, I mean, a child's development is multidimensional. You know, the social, the physical, the social and emotional, physical, intellectual, even educational development, even spiritual development is affected by abuse. And one of the things that have stood up with me over the years is the whole issue of educational development. And I think, Kim, it is connected a lot to with domestic violence and aggressive behaviors within the context of the home, where we have seen, it is connected to that one, is also connected to issues of separation between parents, and where the parents have a hostile, strained relationship between the two of them. When they know, you know, the lovey-dovey thing has gone through, they know they know each other's throat, and that child is caught in the middle.
In the middle, yeah.
Yeah, and then I have seen children who were doing so well in school, just like, you know, just grades have fallen, they're not interested, they're sleeping, you know, in the classroom, they might become aggressive or withdrawn, you know, they're just taking on a lot. So abuse, especially in many instances, emotional abuse and neglect, because neglect, you know, if your child is not given breakfast and the child is, you know, in the home and nobody's like some children if you have instances that children just in your home, somebody might give them a plate of food because food is cooked, but there's no warmth, there's no affirming, there's no endearing, there's no feelings of belongingness in that situation. That child can revert to childlike behaviors. The child can even become ill. So the child begin to develop, symptomatic issues for things that might not be, not be actually wrong with that child, or the child might actually become ill. So but I really, I've been really just being really amazed to see how the issue of child's educational development is influenced by and impacted by abuse, especially neglect, and the issues of separation between parents, separation, whether it be separation and divorce, whatever, and the parents are not getting along. So the child is caught in an emotionally abusive, toxic situation, which affects them in so many ways. And one of the casualties is their education. I'll leave the others to deal with some of the other areas.
To take on from where you left off, it is very much so true that these children are being caught in a crossfire. And remember when I spoke of parents, not adults, not being able to cope when you identify the fact that their issues are impacting on the child, and children being placed in the crossfire. And with the thing is with child abuse, it really upsets or interrupts the child's right to health and to have a healthy family life, to have access to education without personal interrupting their low recreation, their play time. And all of that really interrupts the child's personal development, not being able to interact happily with their friends. And there's a aspect of child abuse that concerns me: teenage pregnancy. Now, I am pregnant as a teenager, but I am a child. I've been given a certain degree of responsibility that I'm truly not prepared for. My body, neither my mind. But this child comes and I'm expected to sacrifice and commit, and all these are things that adults are supposed to do. And the thing about it is there's no handbook. And we see the result and the impact of teenage pregnancies. And it is truly affecting their children. They weren't ready. A lot of persons have not really grown. And that's a part of potential, attaining their full potential as young mothers. They were not able to enjoy life as children. And it's difficult for some persons to disconnect the difference between being a teenager and adult. So you try to parent your children as the teenager, as the friend, and you lose your way in the true style of parenting. Because as a parent, you have to sacrifice. You have to be able to apply these soft skills, the emotional intelligence. I've asked children, when last did your mother or father say that they love you? Ma'am, I don't know. And that is hard, because children love affection. Females, men, persons love affection, and we love attention. We like communicate. Most persons like to communicate, and they like to talk. So it is important that we look at embracing these children, even when they're becoming teenagers and they try to, find their way. Adolescence is a very, very difficult stage. So when you add things like child abuse, for whatever the factors may be, it prohibits the child's potential to achieve that real goal that they could have risen to. I will leave it there and allow Pastor Selman to expand further. Thank you.
No, I'm good. I think you all have explained enough, really.
Okay. All right. And even if you look at when we add the finances, and I've heard persons in relationships and they say, I have no place else to go, especially if you're living at the male or the female, whoever the household belongs to. They will say, I have no place to go. But with the Domestic Violence Act, there are protection orders in place where, and it seeks to protect the family, where they can, their orders can be put in place, applied for, and the court can actually ask the perpetrator to leave the home environment, even if it's just for a little while. Counseling can be assigned at the welfare department, and family crisis intervention can be assigned. And if there is improvement, then that person can be allowed to return home. I find that the court is trying now not to interrupt the home environment. So I truly believe that lots of persons are not educated to the fact or the powers that has been placed in the Domestic Violence Protection Order Act, and then that's an avenue that we do have to explore in assisting families to cope or to prevent domestic violence.
Okay, our question goes, what directives can be given in situations where there are children being abused by an older female member of the family? We know that many say men are the main perpetrators of such acts, but we also have seen reports of women doing such acts to young males in the family. So what directives can be given in situations where there are children being abused by older female members of the family?
Let me take this one again. The same procedure, the same process for intervention. Abuse is abuse, so whether it's being done by a female or male and male on female, whatever, it's the same procedure. When children are being abused, the matter should be directed to the child care board. Abuse is criminal, it's breaking the law. And as Ms. Harris will tell you, we work very closely with the police to ensure that, you know, the due process is done to the child. It's not always difficult. There's so much, sometimes variables and mitigating factors in there. But when it's a female, and I'm assuming based on your question that you're talking about sexual abuse, I'm just assuming, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it is physical abuse, whatever the form of abuse, if because abuse is breaking the law as in relation to the child, is the Prevention of Cruelty Against Children Act that, you know, speaks specifically to the abuse of children and what should be done in those instances. The matter should be reported to the child care board. If the child has been injured or whatever, the matter will also be reported to the police, and the parents will be dealt with accordingly. So there's no difference. One of the areas that we sometimes don't talk about, and it's not being abuse in the strictest sense of the word, well, in the legal sense of the word, but it is abuse nevertheless. And this is the phenomenon that we have, that is, I call it a phenomenon, but it is the trend where we have a lot of minor and unminor inappropriate sexual activity, where we have a lot of school children, school-age children having sex with younger children. You have siblings having sex with their younger sisters and cousins, and I'm talking children under the age of 10. We get reports from schools, or we have principals that sometimes would call and say, look, come and talk to this class, class 1 or class 2. And the children are under, you know, the desk, or they're in the toilet or whatever they're doing, or children are actually, you know, would try to, you know, to look at another child's private parts or touch it or whatever. And parents some people don't take too kindly to this at all, and they might want to go the distance as far as, you know, getting some satisfaction, to put it in the Bajan parlance where that is concerned. So that is an area we also need to look at. It's not sexual abuse under the legal term, but it is an area that a lot of our younger girls under the age of 10 are being exposed to sexual activities by older boys, still minors, right? So you talk about boys at 11 and 12 and 13 and 14, or vice versa, to sexual activity, which also puts them in the category of being at risk as well. I hope we were able to answer your question. And if Kim want to add anything.
Yes. Relative to any reports received by the police, any reports relating to domestic violence has to be, whether it's actual or suspected, it has to be investigated and recorded. they have, we have a domestic violence register, and as reports are entered, they are registered for accountability. To touch on the perpetrator, whether male or female, they're accountable and held liable for the offense committed under the Act. Relative to age of criminal liability, it is 11, and very much so, children under the age of 11, this type of behavior, sexual deviance, you would more so assign to the probation, to child care board for child protection, where investigation may be done in the household, because like I spoke about observational learning, and a lot of children see behaviors in their households that are really not inappropriate, and it only becomes questionable when they go to other person's households to realize, you know what, this is not the norm. So children under a certain age have to be treated in accordance with the law, because you really do not want a younger child to feel as though they are a perpetrator or a criminal. So socially, you try to maintain the childlike behavior, you try to work with the families, but a perpetrator can be a male or female, and there's no excuse for a breach of the law. So that is important to note. Child abuse is so wide, and I keep saying lack of education and denial, key factors. Thank you.
Okay, at what stage or when is it decided that a child should be removed from the home? You know, sometimes we hear people say we reported, or we told the authorities that something is going wrong in that house, a child is being abused, and they might have visited the home, and the child who is being abused remains in the home. At what stage, at what point is it decided that this child needs to be removed from the home?
Okay.
Okay, go on, Kate.
A
Sorry.
report is made. The report is made, investigations are carried out. The home might be deemed, and it might be deemed that the child is being neglected, abused, abandoned. They may need child protection, and child protection, Sister Wave will be able to go further into detail. And we do work hand in hand in trying to protect our children. And if it is deemed that the environment is inappropriate, the child care board is contacted. Ms. Wave will speak on that, and they're entered into care for for protection. Police investigations, reports are made to the police. Investigations are carried out. In most cases, it is very difficult to get the type of information we need, but the child is interviewed with an independent person, whether it be a member of the child care board or a relative, and a statement is recorded and co-signed by that person who is present. Once we do have that statement and there's evidence to substantiate a charge, the person can be charged and put before the court. And though there is the Domestic Violence Act, there are also other acts or all-inclusive laws, the offenses against the persons, criminal damage, that can speak to imprisonment of or charging the perpetrator. So that is basically the process. But if we stay within the Domestic Violence Act, you can apply for the protection order. A sergeant can apply for an emergency protection order. In most cases, though, the perpetrator is removed from the household to maintain a certain degree of safety for the other members of the household.
Thank you, Kim. And just to add to that, if just to answer the question in the strictest sense of a response, a child will be removed from a home if the child is deemed to be at risk in that particular situation. And that comes as at the end of an assessment, and obviously the assessment that is done at that particular point in time. And a lot of variables can go into that at the time of the intervention, whether the parent or the perpetrator is cooperative, shows remorse, is open to counsel, maybe sent to for further intervention or a psychologist or whatever, both parent and child, parenting classes, etc., etc., etc. And in the event of sexual abuse, though, if the perpetrator is in the home, and you know sometimes it's like the home belongs to the perpetrator and he's refusing to move out, the child will be removed from the home, not necessarily placed in residential care. And residential care, we try to make it the last resort for placing children. And and if you think about it, you could appreciate a child who's been abused, for any type of abuse, which in itself is, you know, the child is going through had gone through some type of trauma. The child gets removed, the child goes into a residential home, a second set of trauma, because now you're not going with a whole new set of people you don't know, a whole set of children in a whole new environment. And then you might, if the matter is something that has to go before the court, you have that to deal with. It's, you know, you may have to change school, well, really, but it may even come down to that, whatever the case might be. That's a lot for a child. And what we try to do is to have the child go with a relative or someone else who can care for the child, even if it's just in the short term. What we also try to do is to place them with short care foster parents, so that we have short-term care foster parents who can offer some type of care where, you know, while the matter is being fully investigated, and while, you know, so that you can come to a more informed decision for the long-term well-being of that child. You must appreciate that human nature is very, sometimes unpredictable at best, fickle at most, and you know, and sometimes persons will, you know, that's something you think are doing very good, and I'm sure that Kim could attest to that, they might be doing very good, and then one thing happened, and then everything, that work that you have done with them, just, you know, they're coming, I done with this man, I was doing this, and I'm doing this no more, and this thing or whatever, and so all the work you have put in, and so somebody from the outside looking and say, we call each other about every saying something, they may do nothing, and she did, but then they would feel to where it's like 2 years have passed, and like nothing significant happened. You know, the initial intervention was working, and they come to a point, you know, where cases are closed because cases are always coming in, etc. So the number of variables is not as sterile as we think. The whole idea is to try to maintain children's emotional well-being as much as possible, and see it sometimes for the, listen, all children would want is that their parents to be nice to them and treat them well. All right, and so if we can get parents to come, you know, to be able to change their behaviors, and, you know, and work with us to be better parents for their children, that's really the aim. All right, but in the interim, the child is at risk for sure, right? If the child is at risk initially, or if the child becomes at risk, the child will be removed.
Okay, I think this question can be fitted in here. This question is for Mrs. Harris. Does the Act also include police making regular checks to a residence where there is known abuse of children?
No, the Act does not speak to that. However, if I don't want to say assume, but I have heard of community officers or persons who work on the shift who is aware of persons being affected or families being affected by domestic violence, who may make routine visits. But from the scheme perspective, there is a monitoring system. If we are aware of child abuse or any form of abuse in the household, there is a monitoring system where we will have follow-ups and monitoring. But there are conditions that apply to the Domestic Violence Act with the protection orders. So should the perpetrator breach the orders, the police, there are some protection orders that have warrants to arrest attached to it, and you can then apply that or in reference to the protection order. So though it does not have a monitoring, it carries also, the court can also assign other provisions where the perpetrator and the family can have treatment at the welfare department, or they can request private counsel for assistance. But there is nothing stating that the police has to, but it's a courtesy that can be assigned.
Okay. Do you think it's natural for a couple going through abuse? Do you think that they would snap at the child or children involved in the relationship? Or is there some way that that can help mainly for the mother?
I would say that couples conflict impact on the child. I've seen children who are placed in the middle of this, in the crossfire of the breakup or interruption of the relationship. And it is very, very difficult for these children to function. I've had children who have stated, I feel depressed. I feel as though I need to run away because daddy is not happy that the daughter is not taking his side. He believes that she's taking mommy's side, and the child is really held in the crossfire. And the child says, I'm confused. I don't know what to do. I have had a situation where a father deprived the mother from having access to the child because they were going through a court proceedings. And once the relationship is flourishing, they're in love, they see the best in each other. However, when there's a crash in the relationship, amazingly, some negativity is assigned to the parent, to each other. And in some cases, one parent is very quiet and they're not assigning negative or positive.
Okay. I think this question though is sorry, you weren't finished, sorry?
I was saying there's the other parent who assigns some negativity by calling the parent names and stating that they have no parenting skills and they're no good, if we want to use that terminology. Go ahead.
Okay. Is there some way that the mother can get help in a relationship where there is discord? I am getting that from this question.
Yes, we have a victim support panel, and from the victim support, we have persons who are trained in counseling, trauma counseling, and there is also family crisis intervention. That is through the family conflict department. They provide counseling. So there are avenues that are available to persons who are experiencing difficulties in coping.
Okay.
I just want to add to that, Kim, that I think the question that asked if the parent would snap at the child. Let me just say that I have seen instances where a child got injured by one parent throwing an object at another, and it wasn't meant for the child, but the child was the one who actually got the bad end of that situation. So parents, again, as I mentioned before, when parents separate and they're trying to cut between, we get instances where parents, with the father would bring money or something for the parent and would not give the child to bring to the parent, would call the child to leave the message, to give the message to the other parent. Where some parents would say some real bad things to children about the other parent. Some really, really negative, dirt, nasty things about and I always wonder, but that's the person that you don't have a child with it. It couldn't be that bad. And then that means that you're a bad judge of character. So they tell them that as this is not good. So, and it really messes up children. It puts them in a situation where they have to act like a peacemaker, a parent themselves, you know, to be able to just to find a balance, you know, between the two parents, not wanting to kind of offend either of them. And then we have like instances where you have access orders, like weekend visits to one parent, usually to the father, or every other weekend or one day weekend. And sometimes we will call them the honeymoon visits, where the child would go to the parent for that weekend and have a blast, go to Jafet, and go to the beach and do all the fun things. And then, you know, so they always see that parent as like, you know, the fun person. They might get more privileges, allowed to do more, break the rules or whatever. And then they go back to the other parent, which is where life happens. You know, the one that has all the bills and all the stresses and so on, and who might be not as patient with them and or whatever. So the child is always caught in these types of situations. And parents have to be very, very, very careful and very wary of, very careful and very cognizant of their relationships when they break up. The aim of breakup in relationships is that parents should seek to communicate for the sake of the child and should concentrate on raising a whole child. Because if you don't, you're just going to perpetuate the cycle of what has happened to you. That child is going to go up to making decisions, choices of partners, and so on and so forth. It's very, very important that you concentrate on raising a whole child, even though you are broken, even though your relationship is fractured.
Okay. Thank you so much. Just want to step back a little before we go any further. So we have talked about abuse. I am asking if abuse and neglect are the same, and if not, what signs might we look for in neglect? If they are not the same, and what's the difference, and what signs may we look for in a child who is neglected?
Neglect is one of the signs of, is one of the categories of child abuse. Remember we said we had 5 categories: sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. Neglect was one, and we also add to that abandonment. So neglect is one category of abuse. So it is, well, so it's the same in that it is, when you are neglected, is a form of abuse. I remember that neglect comes in a number of ways. Neglect is further broken down by, you can have various types of neglect. So there's supervisory neglect, which is a big issue here in the Caribbean, right? Supervisory neglect, leaving children unattended or not properly supervised. We have financial neglect, which I mentioned a while ago with, did I mention about parents or one parent not financially supporting the child? We have medical neglect. Children are ill for whatever reason. They're not given the medical intervention they should have. And then we even have what we call our psychological, emotional neglect, where children are not affirmed, they're not loved. They're always spoken to roughly. In the Caribbean, I don't know if it's because of our residual slavery experience or whatever, but something we can be very harsh in the way we speak to our children. Our tones are very rough. It's like, come along, you know, and that, you know, we're always harsh. And we see it as a norm, you know, we're not vexed, we're not angry, this is the way we talk, right? And so our children are also, we find our children speak in this brazen, harsh way, and the tones are, there's no tones of warmth, because that is not how we speak to our children. So, yes, so neglect can be, so we have neglect can be where you have issues of commission, like the things you do towards the child, and then you have the area of omission, the things that you neglect to do. Sorry, you apply the child here, you didn't wash the hair, you didn't bathe the child, you didn't give the child breakfast at school, you didn't press the school uniform, right? So you can have, so neglect is broken down in these categories and in these 2 areas as well, and there are forms of abuse. It's a category of abuse.
Let me add something there to that, as it relates to neglect. I generally see neglect as a parent withholding from a child the very basic things that the child needs: love and you know, compassion. Where, you know, if a child is in need of medical attention, rather than get the child the medical attention, it would refuse to give it or wouldn't give it at all. if the child needs to get his fixed, or something that the child needs, is I like to think of as those basic things in life that a person needs. And oftentimes, when a parent is neglecting a child, it could be because the parent does not know how to treat the child, because the parent might be on drugs or on alcoholic or something of that nature, or it could be that the child, resembles the father that no longer love, or something to that nature. So rather than taking care of the basic emotional and psychological, and even giving the child food at times and putting decent clothes on them at times, I like to put in the category of neglect. And so I do know, and I do believe that neglect can be a little more than that, as much as that is what they give us, because we have a number of children today that we can call the latchkey children, those children who have to look after themselves in the morning for school. They have their own food. They have to come home, and mommy or daddy is not home, and they have to come home and clean house and get food together. So to me, all of that is neglect when the child is raising itself. And not only raising itself, the child is also asked to raise other children out of its siblings. So to me, this is a category of neglect, and it is seen very often. But the one where the children go out and come home and do things of their own, and sit down and watch television while whatever is going on, we do not generally pay attention to that. But what this actually does for children is that it makes it they grow up with a lack of discipline. They grow up not learning well, and as a result, these children become a burden to the community, to the church at times, and overall to the society of which they're part of.
Okay. How do we know for sure that the men really doing these things unless you women see or eyewitness for themselves what happened, especially if they have it on camera or have pictures of it and the man did not even know?
What are they referring to? Emotional abuse, physical abuse?
Yeah.
What are they referring to?
It seems as though this is physical abuse or
Because the
sexual abuse.
the thing with physical abuse is that physical abuse, there are generally signs, and the officer will tell you that. Imagine there's signs, and this is why oftentimes when children are physically abused, you need to get them to the doctor within a certain time, because scars have a way of healing. And so, but you can have physical signs, black eyes, and it is not always black eye. It could be other signs of the body that may not be visible, and that the children may actually cover up for the sake of the children, because for the sake of their parents, because they do not want their children to go to prison. And they're, like we've said earlier, they want to protect children. So generally, there's signs that children are physical abuse, being physically abused. The only signs that you may not be aware of will be emotional abuse when it comes to children, because they're not physical scars for that. But you can see though, you can have evidence to physical abuse. Of course, with emotional abuse, you can find children are withdrawn. You can find the children, like we said earlier, they're not doing well in school. They don't have a lot of friends. So these are some of the signs of emotional abuse. But with physical, you know that with neglect, you can see that the child is not being well cared for. The way that the child is dressed, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the things that we can look for. I'll let the officer deal with that, because I imagine she sees more of that.
But we're looking at evidential value, and the perpetrator can be male or female. There has to be evidence in order for you to proceed. After investigations have been carried out, and you recognize that you have enough evidence to act, then you can proceed by way of what powers you have, which offense was committed will determine what act, what charge or what powers the police will have. Sister Wave spoke earlier about the belt mark on the child's skin. We also spoke about the unexplained bruises, the location of the bruises, and if you go back to neglect, the neglect to have access to school where the child has excessive absentees within the school year. And then all of these are signs that, there is something wrong. But you do need to have some type of evidence that there is the physical abuse. The emotional abuse can be determined through interviews and the child, because especially with children, even with adults, children who are abused are not trustworthy. They do not trust easily. It takes time for them to build a relationship and trust you in order to share that type of information with you. But once there is evidence and you can afford a charge, the matter will be taken seriously and the perpetrator will be brought before the court. But whether it is a man or a woman or a guardian, sex does not matter. The perpetrator will be brought before the court. Once we have the evidential value and voice investigations are being carried out, like as Ms. Swift has said, for the protection of the child, even though the child is not taken into care, the child can be removed from the household, or the perpetrator can be removed for the safety of that child.
Okay, thank you.
Has that cleared up what they were asking?
Maybe the person could indicate in the chat if that was sufficient, and they can rewrite the question more clearly if that was not answered clearly enough. I just want to mention that while we are speaking about the Child Care Board here, in Dominica, I think it is a social services department that would deal with these issues regarding abuse, child abuse, and so. There is a question in the chat. Hi, good night. If a child confides in your child about cutting, and my child tells me, what should I as a parent do, knowing that child's parent doesn't know?
Repeat that again, please.
If a child confides in your child about cutting, apparently the child is cutting himself or maybe being cut, and my child tells me, what should I as a parent do, knowing that the child's parent doesn't know?
Children like to hold secrets for each other, but we have to understand that though children hold secrets for each other, adults have a responsibility to have a responsibility for the safety of children, and it means therefore that the adult parent has a responsibility to follow through on that. One of the things we have to understand when it comes to children is that we are not to get into the habit of holding secrets for them, those kind of secrets that are harmful to them. So it means that if a child brings to your attention that another child is cutting, um, that means there needs to be a discussion between the parents, because the fact that the child is a cutter means that the child is carrying a significant amount of pain. It could be as a result of the very some form of abuse that the child is experiencing, and therefore it's something that needs to be addressed. And so I would imagine that any responsible adult or responsible parent, having received that kind of information, would follow through in some way or the other to help that child. The reality is it may require reporting, because reporting has become mandatory, and we are not to be so loyal to our friends, because since the two children may be good friends, chances are the parents may also be friends. So we are not to be so loyal to each other that we ignore the safety of our children. And of course, the age of the child is important, because it would help to, the age of the child will help to determine the process that you would have to take in order to go about helping the child to ease that pain. But I'm saying that it has to be that these two parents put their heads together and try to do all they can to help the child that is in pain. And later on, you have to explain to the child why is it that you had to disclose his or her secret. Just when I explained, it was for their own safety and for the safety of the entire family.
Right. Just to add to that, in addition to that, all children who are cutting and self-harm is entering into the sphere of mental health, and those matters are dealt with via the child guidance clinic at the psychiatric hospital. Not necessarily the child have a psychiatric problem, but the child is emotionally imbalanced enough to want to cut and self-harm. So that's an area that's in that case they would deal with that. If the parents in this case, if the parent with the information don't know the other parent or does not want to get involved, all the parents simply have to do is report it to child care board. That's all it is. The child care board would not necessarily intervene if, well, it depends on the information given, but would see, of course, the parent be contacted, and and arrangements will be made for that child to be seen by the professional who deals with those matters at the child guidance clinic. And this is very, very important. Our children now are cutting for a number of reasons. Boyfriend leave them, not doing well in schools, and then they call, they did something wrong, and when they go home, the parents say they come home and you come and say they can beat you, and they're cutting for a number of reasons. And sometimes it's one if it's like almost like a like kind of can imitating what the friends are doing or whatever. But reality is the fact that you are doing it indicates that there's some type of emotional stress going on with you. The fact you want to cut your wrist, cut your leg, they're trying to use something with ice or whatever it is that they do. That it means that child needs that type of mental health intervention, as opposed, I'm not saying the child is mentally ill, but the child needs that mental health intervention before this, the situation gets any worse. So if you that parent does not have to deal with the other parent, just report it and it will be addressed.
Okay, at this point, I just want to say that, just in case some persons have just joined, we have here in Barbados, we have the Child Care Board and the Juvenile Liaison Scheme for assisting children who are at risk or in need of some protection. And in Dominica, the state institution is the social services. So I just wanted to put that in just in case there is someone in need of that information at this time.
Thank you. A quick question. Can a person report suspected abuse anonymously? Is that allowed?
Definitely, definitely. You're not required to give your name or whoever, as long as what you're required to do is to have as much information about the matter as possible. Because if you call and you just, and the information is very vague, you're not sure of the address, you're not sure of the school, you're not sure of the name of the child, you're not sure of anything, it makes it a lot harder sometimes to locate persons or as the case might be. But you do not necessarily have to give your name.
So I know that the time is fast spent and we are hurrying on to 9 o'clock, but I do want us to touch a bit on restoring these children who have been abused. Is it possible, or how far is it possible? What do we do to help these children who have been abused?
One of the things that I had mentioned earlier is the therapeutic intervention. You see, many of these children can be helped. Yeah, they can be helped, but these children would have to get into some form of counseling. And I've said before, and I'll say again, there seems to be a stigma associated with counseling. For some persons, going to a counselor means that they are mad, but I like to think of it the other way. You're mad if you don't go to a counselor if something is wrong with you. So I like to think that because the counselor is well trained, that is a counselor in the area, because all counselors are not necessarily trained in the area of um, of to help children who are abused or are abused or being abused. So as long as you can find someone who is in working with children, then that person can work with the child to help the child get past and come back, get past all of the pain and the hurt, and get come back to a place of normalcy. For some children, it will take time. I know my experience has been that parents get very anxious. They bring the child to you for 2 sessions and they expect the child to be cured. I don't know how they expect that, because if the child has been going through this trauma for months, hence years, is not anything that can be solved in any short space of time. But I think you need to at least give a counsel about 3 months, 3 to 4 months, to help with the child, depending on what is the diagnosis. I always suggest, first of all, that the child goes and see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist can properly diagnose the child to see what is the actual diagnosis, and then after that, the child can reach out and get counseling for the child based on the diagnosis, because children can develop different problems as a result of abuse. Now there are some adults, children, some adult children. I don't know if that is correct. Okay, there are some children who are in their 20s and even in their 30s, suffer from dysfunctions, suffer problems. Let me keep it simple. Suffer from problems that have been associated with the abuse. And they did not know that until they come and sit down with you, when they realize that something is not. And then they get to realize, then they get to, they're brought to the knowledge that abuse has been the problem these years, and it gives them something to work with. So I'm saying, if a child, I'm saying that there's hope for children who have been abused, but they need to get into some kind of counseling regime that will help them. And listen, all counselors help you. Huh? You can go to one counselor, you may not make it there for different reasons. It is best that this counselor, if he's not or she is not making progress, to refer to somewhere else. Because remember, your priority has to be your child. That has to be your priority.
Okay, and just let me add to that as well that yes, I do believe that all children can be helped, and conversely, I've sat, no, sorry, never sat, I've been doing presentations over the years, and we're talking to a group of, maybe at a church or PTA, PSA, whatever the case might be, and you're talking about abuse generally, and maybe then about sexual abuse specifically, and you would see persons just like going to themselves and like the head might bow a little bit. You might ask them, even see pain on their faces because they have not healed, they have not worked through whatever, I don't know what the situation might have been, but you can tell that something occurred that, this have this long-term psychological effect on them. And so it is important that the sooner a child obtains the help after abuse, the better. And it will take counseling. So it depends on the situation, it depends on the child, it depends on the support that the child is missing. If that child if the environment changes for that child, and the child is taken from a situation and within the context of their home, and the situation is now where the home is more stable and more secure, where the child now feel more love, where the child understands it is not your fault, you're not to feel guilty, you're not to be blamed, you didn't do anything wrong. No adult has a right to do this to you, and you are being very brave by telling somebody we are so proud of you, and you begin to continue to affirm and to pour. It's just that you have a glass of dirty water and you're pouring in, even if you pour in a drop of clean water, one drop at a time, eventually that water will become clean. And so eventually the child will begin to heal emotionally. If the child, is beginning now to be told that you're special, you're important, you're worthwhile, and most of all that God loves you, he can deal with all the issues that you're dealing with, whatever, and this child will begin to heal. As I said, the earlier the better, because if the longer you allow persons to go through, and years ago a lot of persons were abused as well. I didn't even realize that they were being abused. A lot of adults, a lot of people have gone to their grave, with secrets of their stepfathers, their fathers, brothers who would have sexually abused them and stuff. But now with the age of education and diversion of information and so on and reporting, we can't set our children up to report and then just intervene and then leave them. We have to go one step further and make sure that we set a process in place where they receive the necessary counsel and additional intervention to put them on a path to healing. And that is what's important. We have to, it take long in some instances, but we have to put them on that path.
The thing is that with children too, along with that, is that, and I think this is what you're hinting at there, that I think is very, very critical, that children will need a lot of parental support when it comes to their healing process. And this is, in addition to that, I think it would be helpful, a good intervention, to have at times the entire family in the counseling environment, because the child did not get that way on his own. And so to help that child, you will need all family members involved. There has to be a lot of education, parental classes given to the parents. There needs to be, you have to make sure that there's no depression in the child, because if there's depression in the child, chances are there's depression in the parents, which can lead to suicide feelings, suicide thoughts, suicide ideation. So that there are a number of factors that are involved when treating children. And so it means that every family member needs to commit himself or commit themselves to working in the best interest in the child, because the child needs that support. One of my experiences has been is that for parents who did not support children, well, the child looked forward to the weekly half an hour counselor, yes, but the child goes back into the same environment again. And so it is a hard thing for children, because let's be honest with ourselves, folks, children are not supposed to, they're not supposed to be going through that kind of stuff. We are here to make sure that our children are safe, well protected. And if we fail in doing that, it means when we understand that we have messed up, because everybody didn't intend to mess up. But when we realize that we have messed up, every effort should be made, a commitment needs to be made to make sure that that household is involved in the treatment.
Yeah, that is so true. Parental support, or maybe just support from a significant other, wherever it might be, even if the parent doesn't do it, but an auntie or uncle or somebody that giving that child that emotional support is critical. The worst thing you could tell a parent could tell a child is, "I don't believe you," or or you look for it, or if you didn't too fast, it wouldn't happen. That sort of stuff. We don't want to. Some years ago, we had at my agency what we call a sexual survivors group for young children. And even though it wasn't a psychological approach, that social interaction was really, really beneficial when children recognizing, hey, I'm not in this alone, somebody else went through it, and they were able to, to talk about their experiences and be supportive to each other. And we did a number of activities, a number of things to show them that in spite of that they're awesome, that they're that they're worthy, that they're worthwhile, and that they have value. And that was really, really, really beneficial in helping them to get over to a large extent, to get over the emotional and long-term repercussions of abuse. And then we had group work for our teenagers. Those were the ones who would normally sometimes get refers from the hospital or whatever. And these are teenagers who be involved with sexually with older men, have multiple partners, and a whole lot of things going on with them. And again, these groups were invaluable. What really helped them to see again that they're not the only ones struggling with some of these issues, and then we met with the parents, by themselves, and then with the children and so on. And those children, I mean, in some instances, some of them may still have struggles, but we were able to have parents say that they have seen turnaround in the lives of these children and making better decisions. We will deal with issues such as decision making choices, self-worth, and that sort of stuff. But the whole thing is to instill in persons the whole concept of being valuable, and being valuable all by themselves just because they're a child of God. And I always tell them that you're valuable all by yourself, without any addition, without if you get an accident and your face is all damaged and you being sure whatever, you're still valuable because you're a child of God. And that, when they begin to understand that, they don't have to be a Christian or whatever, when they begin to understand that, it begins to give them a new perspective, a new way of seeing themselves, and then the choices that they make will eventually become better. They may not solve all their problems this year or next year, but eventually they begin to do better because this information, the impact of this information in their lives begin to take hold as they move forward into adulthood.
Okay, we have about 3 more questions that we'll try to get in very quickly. So if your answers could be as succinct as possible. Is it possible for a child to confuse abuse for affection?
Most definitely, there
I didn't
are.
hear the question, sorry.
Is it possible for a child to confuse abuse for affection?
Of course, there are. See, you have to understand that children reach out for love and caring. And so oftentimes when some children are being abused, they don't understand what it is. Now, there are some children know this thing don't feel right and very uncomfortable. But there are some children, I believe, see this as, this is what you do if you love someone. What this man is doing to me is normal because he told me he loved me, and so This is his way of demonstrating to me that he loves me. And so, as confused as children can get about these things, it is very possible that children can actually confuse too. It's only as children get older and begin to make more sense of it, realize that this thing don't feel right, that they begin to change their minds. Now, this doesn't happen with every child, because these things, when it comes to children, a lot of it has to do with where the child is, where his level of maturity, how the child thinks and feels, and so on and so forth. So all children are not the same. Oftentimes we like to take all these things and wrap these things into one, but there are children who see this as affection, but then there are others who see it as something that they can't put a name to or a label to, but they know that something is wrong, until eventually, in both cases, I imagine, when they've reached a certain age, they get to realize, you know what, this here is not right. This is not. So maybe I need to address it. And some of them don't seek to address it because they do not believe that mommy is going to agree or believe that this is happening. And so I think it's always important that as long as a child comes and says that your friend or your husband or whatever is touching me in the wrong way, that you believe the child first. Because oftentimes children will just tell a lie just like that. For a child to tell a lie like that, there's a lot more going on with that child that we don't have time to discuss.
Okay. And then let me just add to, and that is why for the last 20 years or so, we've been doing a program called, we call it Safe Touch program, but it really entails good touch, bad touch, and confusing touch. There's a touch that is a confusing touch. That is a good touch gone bad, if there's such a thing. And you can, for instance, say hugging, right? Of course, hugging is one of the most pleasurable touches that COVID-19 has really put a, that's another discussion all in itself, right? But hugging, right? But there is a point where a hug, which is a good touch, of which a child needs, turns into a bad touch when it turns into a squeeze and a rubbing and a grinding on the body. And that's why parents need to be very cognizant, especially with their children, because many adults, I don't want to say men, let me just be, just say adults, go through what they begin to inflict on children, what we call grooming, right? So it's the tickling, and it's the and they give them sweets and oh, he really likes my child, he always brings something I give her, and then come and give me a hug, sweetheart, or then he's lifting her up and then she's sitting in his lap and so on and so forth. And this child is being groomed for eventual penetration or whatever the case might be. And so therefore, there are touches which could be safe touches, but they can go bad and become harmful to children. But the thing is that by the time they get bad because the child is being groomed, the child don't even recognize that the child is being abused. So you might be confused, and it's like, this don't really feel good. And depending on the situation, what's going on in your household, what is the norm or whatever, you might not realize that this is not the norm, is not what is done. So yes, there might be a time when, like, you kissing the child on her lips. That's not best you to kiss her, right? But that the parent might say that, oh, he loves her so much. He's really, every time he comes, he gives something, he brings something, he gives to her, And so parents have to be so aware of these situations, because a pedophile will be a pedophile, will be a pedophile. We got to be careful of them in our churches. Grown-ups who like to be around children a lot, or like want children to be their friends. Children are your friends. Go look for your own friends. So they're always in and among them. You have to be very, very, cognizant of that and put steps in place to protect your children or protect our children.
Okay, here's another question. Do you think that the educational sector needs to bring sex education at a primary level in the schools?
Yes, I do, with parameters or boundaries. We don't have to tell children everything, but yes, I do, because our children today are very exposed, very knowledgeable, and they will teach us a thing or two, we grown-ups. And so because our environment is educationally toxic, is sexually toxic, right? I mean, they're just exposed, and I think that done really nicely and in a way that you educate them and not just give them information that they don't know how to handle properly, yes, it should be involved. It should be introduced in schools.
Okay, here's a
especially since we have we live in an age of social media, and where our children can go online and they can see all of these toxic, that's the word used, behaviors. I think it is very, very important that some form of appropriate sex education be given to our children, because the research indicates that when you teach children about sex education, the lesser the chance of them becoming sexually active too early. So it's to our benefit to have sex education in our schools. And parents need to teach their children as well appropriate sex education.
If I may add, I am having technical issues, and I do apologize. And sex education is similar to the whole idea of taboo with domestic violence, where it would be important for our children to be aware. Even parents need to be aware of the fact that, if parents, sometimes parents sleep in the same bed as their child, and they may decide that, the child is sleeping, so we can go ahead and we can indulge in our recreational activity, and believe that the child is not noticing or is not aware that there's a difference in the shift of the bed, or whatever the case may be. And then that child takes the behavior to school to explore a similar behavior that is being seen. And we've seen it on many occasions where little ones as early as 6 or 5, there are instances even at preschool where they have been sexual abuse or sexual deviance amongst children. So it would be important, because early prevention will help us to stamp out a lot of this immoral or unacceptable behavior.
Okay, thank you all so much. We are past our 9 o'clock hour, but with good reason. There was so much information shared with us, and having listened, I know that there is a whole lot more. So we may just have to ask these willing panelists to come again, but we have to wrap up at this time. There is one of the beliefs that we have as Christians is that there is a whole lot that is wrought by prayer, a whole lot more wrought by prayer than we can even dream of. And the issue of child abuse is such a horrible one that all our efforts would surely have to be accompanied by prayer. And this evening, I am happy to ask our prayer coordinator, Sister Francis, to give us our closing prayer. And we are going to ask her to pray on behalf of all our children who have or are experiencing abuse, and even for the perpetrators, because it is surely not the will of God. We started with the lyrics of The Greatest Love of All, that song which says, we believe the children are our future, teach them well and let them lead the way. And the future is in their hands, and we want, if time should last, to have a bright enough future for them. And that includes protecting them. And so at this moment, I'm going to ask Sister Francis to pray for us and pray for our children and the perpetrators. Sister Francis?
Hello, good evening, everyone. I invite you now to bow your heads with me as we pray. Our Heavenly Father, we, your children, have gathered here on this virtual platform to thank you for your immense blessings on our lives today. We thank you for your mercies, your love, and protection extended towards every one of us. Indeed, Lord, it's because of your mercies why we are not consumed, but our sins, Father, have separated us from you. So tonight we come asking for cleansing because we have sinned in our thoughts, in our words, and also in our actions. We thank you for tonight's discussion, which have exposed us to certain problems which have come about because we have taken our eyes off you and have listened to the enemy who is now creating havoc in families in Barbados, in Dominica, and around the world. But we are glad, Lord, that you have the solution to all our problems, even that of abuse, where family members are turning against each other in verbal, psychological, physical, and sexual abuse. This was not your plan, Lord. Your plan was and still is for us to dwell in safety, live in peace, love, and harmony, reflecting the heavenly family. There are also problems affecting our children, even from outside the family, like cyberbullying and pornography. But we are glad that no problem is too difficult for you to handle. The COVID-19 pandemic has also brought about its fair share of stress and problems. So tonight, we are asking that you will break up every plan that the enemy has to create chaos in our families. We come against any plan for misunderstanding and confusion, hate, strife, and any form of stress that will cause family members to turn against each other in ways that are contrary to your divine plan. Help family members to remember that you have the power to break every chain, to destroy every work of the powers of darkness. You have the power to deliver, and this power is available to every one of us if we would turn to you with our whole hearts. The Bible tells us that the devil has come to kill, to steal, and to destroy. But praise God, you have come to give us a life, the abundant life. So Lord, help us not to believe Satan's lies, but to know that he's a liar from the beginning and the father of it. Help fathers and mothers, children, and the extended family to recognize that this power which you have put at their disposal. And on the authority of your word, they can pull down strongholds, crush and break in pieces, destroy, chase, and overthrow the powers of darkness so that they can have the peace in their families that only God can give, that peace that none can take away. Help fathers to occupy their rightful places in the homes as priests of their families. Help them, like Abraham, to set up the family altar morning and evenings. As they have such a connection with you, there will be no room for them to abuse their wives nor the children in any way. Help the mothers to be like Mary and Lois, who taught the little ones in their care the Holy Scriptures, which will give them a strong foundation to resist evil. Help the children to be respectful and obedient. May they keep company with children who love the Lord so that they will be positively influenced by them to walk the way of righteousness. Fill each family member with your Holy Spirit so that the fruits of love, joy, and peace might be manifested in them, making each family a safe place, a happy place, a reflection of the family above. So when you come, all parents might be able to say, "Here I am, and the children you have given me." And Lord, as we are soon to retire to our beds, we pray for a safe and restful sleep. This is my prayer, Lord, and I thank you for hearing and answering because I've prayed in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Sister Francis, thank you so much. And
You're
thank
welcome.
you to our panelists, Sister Delvina Waite, Sister Kim Harris, and Pastor Ricardo Selman. Thank you so much for coming in and helping us to be better informed about this issue that pervades in our society, which we often seek to ignore. Thank you so much, Mrs. Jordan, for being my co-anchor. And, you know, my wish is and my prayer is that as we leave here, that we would realize and appreciate the fact that we are better informed. And so we have a responsibility. We have a part to play wherever we are able to help wipe out this issue, this scourge of abuse, whether it's children or women or men or teens. My prayer is that we will do our part by God's help, with God's help, to wipe out the scourge that is in our society. And I think we're going to have another session, if the panelists would agree, because there's a whole lot more that we can look at that can equip us even better for this. So I wish you all a good night. God bless you all. Keep safe and listen out for our next session where we would continue to be informed and educated on this and other topics of importance. God bless you all. Good night.
Good night. Thanks for having me. Good night, everyone. God bless.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Have a restful night.
Good night.